finally gonna talk about color. When I planned this out, I assumed I would still be working on pencils up till now, but I did those real fast, so a little late on here, but I'm gonna talk about some things to keep in mind when you are beginning a color comic. Here we go. That's the intro. So tip number 1, when you are beginning your color comic, make sure that you plan out your color palettes. Pick out colors early on in your design phase. I mean, you'll likely have picked out lots of colors already from designing your characters and your settings. You should have picked lots of lovely colors when you were doing all that. But it's really important early on, whether it's when you're figuring out colors for characters or settings, or if you're just doing like a general picking out colors for your comic, it's really important to understand the color story of your comic. And by color story, I mean, like, what do your colors say about your comic? You know, are you doing something that's kind of like desaturated and kind of gray looking because it's kind of a somber story? You know, are you using really bright, vibrant neon colors matched with like super dark blues and purples because it's like a cyberpunk or something like that? It's really important when you're going in and picking out your colors to really kind of figure out a theme for them and sticking to it. And so, for example, with 9 Point, I was like, I want lots of really earthy tones, but I also want some really nice kind of like magical colors as well, because there are aspects of magic in 9 Point, so I wanted kind of the normal world to have lots of very kind of earthy, neutral tones, and then the more magic-y things are kind of accented by more kind of fantasy colors, like blues and purples and reds and neons and pinks and stuff. And it's also really important that when you have picked out a color story and you've designed all your characters and you got their colors down, you got the colors for all your settings down, that you lay it all out so you can look at all of it at once. And you make sure that all the colors match. So maybe when you were picking through colors for this one character, maybe you picked colors that are too bright for the color story that you're working on. So you need to take, you know, her color palette and you need to tone it down a little bit, make it a little less bright or something like that. But it's really helpful to just kind of see everything so you can make sure that it all fits together and feels like it belongs in the same story. It's really important to get this all out before you start coloring your comic, so you don't have to figure it out on the fly when you're making your pages, because that's just adding more complicated steps to an already complicated process. And you don't want your colors to be all over the place when you're making your comic. I'd also recommend when you're thumbnailing your pages, so before you sit down and you start penciling and making the actual comic pages, do some quick color tests with them. I think I recommended it already in my thumbnailing videos. But it's really important to kind of test out your colors on the page before committing hours and hours of work finishing a page. So just like a really quick sketch, just kind of rough in all the major colors on the page and just make sure everything looks cohesive. Again, look at all your pages all at once. It'll really help. So tip number 2, make sure that you have a very simple coloring style for your comic. I'd recommend avoiding painterly stuff, even though 9 Point is kind of painterly and I'm kind of regretting it right now. But the essence of everything is that comics take a really long time. There's a lot of pages you need to complete, and if you have a very complicated coloring style that takes hours and hours and so many layers and so much time rendering everything, it's going to take even longer. So if you can, unless it's like your dream to have this like really painterly thing, I would definitely recommend picking a color style that's really simple and fast for you to do. So for example, you know, everything could just be flat colors. Or it could have, you know, your flat colors and maybe there's like one shadow and one highlight laid over top. That's fine. Whatever style is simpler for you, whether it's like soft shading or cell shading, whatever it is, whatever goes really fast for you, I'd recommend that you use that. And honestly, even if you pick like a really simple style, it might be really slow at the beginning. So just remember you will get faster with it as you go, but avoid too overly complicated stuff early on and you'll get even faster. So that's really good. Tip number 3, make sure you are using your gosh darn fill buckets or big paint brushes to fill this thing out. Whether it's digital, if it's digital, you can use your fill buckets. If it's traditional, make sure you're using big brushes to color things in. So I hate when I see an artist filling in swaths of color, doing their flat colors or whatever, and they're using like a little tiny brush to fill it in, and it takes them forever. Don't do that. You're wasting your own time. Just make the brush bigger, get a bigger brush, or utilize your fill bucket. You know, the fill bucket on digital art is not always perfect. You may have to fill something and then go in and maybe fix up the edges, whatever it is. That's still way less time than it would take to fill it in with a little tiny brush. So stop wasting your time by hand filling in every itty bitty little thing with tiny little brushes. It's not worth it. Use bigger brushes and fill buckets to do your flats because they take so long. Feels like an obvious one, but I used to do it when I first started comics, and I see lots of other people do it. And I'm just like, quit it. Just get a bigger brush. Anyways, okay. Number 4, when you are coloring your comic, and when you're figuring out your colors, I guess, at the beginning, don't shade with black or gray and avoid muddy palettes. So if you're new to like color and stuff, I mean, honestly, if you've been to like an art class or art school, they probably told you this a million times. But if you're new to color and stuff, you might be like, hey, I need to add a shadow onto this thing. I'll just take like the color black and maybe I'll throw down the opacity so that it's like, you know, you can still see the color underneath, but like, there you go. I've got a darker color. Well, I mean, I guess you would probably have a darker color. However, you also have a grayer color. All the saturation is going to be pulled out because it's got black over top of it or black mixed into it. It's going to make your colors look gray. It's going to make them look muddy and awful and really dull and possibly really flat as well. So whether it's like a shadow on an object or if it's a night scene, don't just turn all your colors gray. Don't do it. That's not how you make your colors darker. It pulls all the saturation out of your artwork. It makes it look muddy. Real shadows in real life and real like night scenes, they are full of really vibrant dark colors. So really saturated colors. And they can be really saturated reds or blues or purples or greens. Like there's so much depth you can add to things and make them darker, as long as they're not only adding black. I mean, obviously you want to darken colors to put shadows in, but don't just add gray or black. It makes it all gross looking. So make sure you're studying from life, you know, grab photos, see what the actual colors look like, go outside, draw from life, from your own eyes. You'll see that the colors inside of shadows are very vibrant and deep. And you can also look at what other artists are doing and what colors they're using for their shadows. But just don't use pure black or gray, okay? Promise me. Thank you. Really early on with my first comic, Sovereign, the colors at the beginning were super muddy because I made everything super desaturated and it looked really bad and really ugly and mid-tone and gross. So make sure that you're using a big variety of value and saturation. And tip number 5, check how things will look when you print them. So if you plan to print your comic, I know not everyone will. A lot of people will just stick to webcomic form, and that's totally fine. But if you do eventually want to print your comic, it's really important to know how it's going to look when it's printed. It'll affect how you create your pages, what colors you can use, what values you're going to use. It affects a lot. It's really important to understand that screens are capable of colors that like standard printer inks are not capable of. So for example, screens in RGB can show super saturated like neon-y colors, whereas if you printed those same colors, you know, they look nice and bright on your screen, you're going to print them and they're going to look gray just because the ink can't go that bright unless you got like super special ink, but that would probably cost you a lot of money. Before, in the past, I probably would have told you to use CMYK like color profiles for all your stuff if you plan to print your comics, but since I've seen that a lot of people say that printers can handle RGB and convert it or something, I don't know, I'm really confused now, but honestly, I guess either is fine, but I'd really make sure that you test what it looks like when you print it out. And if you do want to use CMYK, if you want to play it safe, I guess, I'd recommend using Photoshop. It gives you little warnings whenever you're about to go out of the CMYK capability set. Whereas with some other programs, I've had trouble with printing the colors and I print them and they look weird. So that's my 2 cents there. Talk to your printer. If you're going to work with a printing shop, ask what they recommend. even before you start. See what options they offer. You don't even have to ask them, like you don't have to go in and talk to people, but just see what they offer, see if they recommend anything on their website, maybe send them an email, I don't know. And if you have all your pages finished and you're sending them the files and stuff to get it actually printed, they'll obviously every time give you a proof copy so you can check that things are printing okay, but it can be very frustrating if you see the proof copy and you're like, oh no, this did not print how I wanted it at all. Then you have to go back and change things. So figure out the printing stuff early. You can always do test pages at home with your own printer or at like a library printer or something, and you can get a kind of decent mock-up and kind of understand how it'll look in final. So yeah, that is all I got. I hope this was helpful. Color comics take a long time. They can be super overwhelming if you're new to it. Our first comic ever was Sovereign, which was a full color comic, and I knew nothing about coloring. The colors were not so good, but I did get better over time, so if you're going into making a color comic and you don't know what you're doing, you're going to learn so much by just doing it. And hopefully these tips kind of help guide you in the right direction to make it look how you want to look. So yeah, good luck, I guess. It's a big undertaking. Oh, something you should also remember about color comics before you decide to make a color comic. You should note that if you do plan to print it, color comics are much more expensive to print than black and white comics. So if you plan to print your book, that is something to consider. Color is like significantly more expensive. Bones and I considered it for 9 Point. Originally, it was supposed to be a black and white comic, but then we made the heckin' magic system based off fur colors. So, oops. So color became very important to the project. And luckily, we found some local printers who can do, like, printing for some pretty good prices. So I guess you can also do that, is just talk to your artist friends, talk to local print shops, see if you can get some good deals to print color stuff. And there you go. Problem kind of solved, maybe. Oh yeah, I guess on the lines of no, never mind. I was gonna talk about talking to print shops and stuff, but I'll save that for another video. That's a whole other topic. Okay, I need to go do my work. Bones talked about it in his video yesterday. He's kind of burnt out on this challenge, and I'm feeling it too. We're so close to halfway, but I'm so tired, and this week has been crazy, and I'm I just don't want to work on comics. I love comics, but I just want to go to bed. We went to Walmart to get bins for our cat food, because our cats are monsters and chewed through the cat food bags. We need a bin that they can't get into, but we couldn't find a bin. We went to the pet store and they had perfect bins, and I was like, maybe they'll have them cheaper at Walmart. And then we went to Walmart and they didn't have any good bins. So I didn't even get the cat bin. It's very upsetting and annoying. And now I have to do art. Oh my god. My life is so hard. Okay, sorry, I'll stop whining and complaining, and I'll go do my art, because as soon as I sit down to do my art, it's really fun. Now I'm just rambling. I'm gonna go. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for following along with our journey into madness. And, I guess check out the 9 Point Kickstarter. It's still going on. There should be a link down below. We're not even halfway through the month, through the campaign length. And we're doing pretty good. And thank you so much if you've already supported. It means a lot to us. We're really excited. I really gotta go get pages done so that we can print this thing. Darn color comics taking so long. Okay, I'm gonna go. Goodbye.